Rejoice, everyone. We're back with another Sekhie Reacts to Fate.
So, on the topic of monsters.
We're covering, like, actual, like, real monsters today.
Yeah. Really quickly, I'm actually going to start with Prelati. Just for ease of you know, getting him done
Nah, you're
fast.
good.
Right? Because we know significantly less about Francois Prelati than we know about Gilles de Rais. And we will talk about both. But so Francois Prelati was a chemist, an Italian cleric who was implicated in the murders committed by Gilles de Rais in the 15th century. During his implication and from what we know about him, he claimed that he could summon demons involving Giles in this practice, and it's possible, according to some speculation, that he and Giles may have been engaged in a way that was not categorized as best friends by historians, but we do not know if that is the truth, so we're gonna, ignore that. We don't know much about him, but what we do know is that after the trial of Gilles de Rais, Francois Prelati was sentenced to life imprisonment, but did manage to escape. He ended up finding refuge in the Duchy of Brittany in the court of Duke Ren of Anjou, who was the son of Yolande of Aragon, who had become the titular king of Sicily, and was the new acting house of Valois-Anjou following the death of Louis III of Anjou. A lot of that we're going to talk about when we get to Gilles de Rais, but this is kind of just like general background stuff. So, good King Ren welcomed artists and poets and such into his court, and so Prelati had gained an audience with him and showed off his alchemical talents, likely trickery, obviously, because he would just like, I can turn this piece of copper into silver, and you kind of pull a fast one with like your fancy footwork. Because the prince was so kind of taken with him, he was appointed head of the La Roche-sur-Yon castle and would take on the identity Francois de Montcatin after his native town, and used his new position to take revenge on Geoffrey Le Ferrand, who was the treasurer of France now, because of the act of force in Saint-Étienne de Mer-Morte with Gilles de Rais. So he would go to visit Prégent the 7th de Coitivy, who was the admiral of France and the husband of the only daughter of Gilles de Rais. And while Le Ferrand was doing this, he passed through La Roche-sur-Yon in 1444 and was invited to the castle by Francois. At this point, he was insulted by the priest Blanchet and then imprisoned on order of Prelati, who blamed him for his own imprisonment. In order to extort a massive ransom from him, they subjected him to 2.5 months of harsh treatment, bordering on torture. They tried to frighten him by pretending to discover a dummy letter that was to portray a betrayal between him against the Prégent de Coitivy. But at this point, René of Anjou demanded that Prelati bring Le Ferrand before the ducal council. The captain pretended to do this, but returned the treasurer to his dungeon, and 12 days later, a lord of Treves, who would appear with a company of 50 men of war at La Roche-sur-Yon, demanding the delivery of Geoffrey Le Ferrand. Prelati opposed the surrender of the fortress, refused to surrender Le Ferrand, and marched out with his own troops, provoking a battle, and this battle ended in the death of one of that Lord of Treves' men. So, a little bit later, René of Anjou sent 2 more officers to try to get him to hand over Le Ferrand, and so he agreed after paying the French treasurer's ransom. Le Ferrand was transferred to Angers, where he launched a complaint unsuccessfully with the audit of Anjou chamber. He was escorted to René d'Anjou in Nancy and remained in custody there for a selection of time. And then Charles VII of France was also staying there at the time, and Charles VII of France has had dealings with Gilles de Rais. When the French king heard of this, he sent the affair to the Parliament of Paris, who condemned Prelati and his accomplice, the squire Jacques Chabot, to death, And near the end of March of 1446, or perhaps at the beginning of April of 1446, he was burned at the stake to atone for his crimes. Several of his accomplices, like Blanchette and others, were also referred to the Parliament of Paris, who condemned them as well, although most of them were just fined, perpetually banished, and had their property confiscated. So, in reality, he's kind of just a lackey of Gilles de Rais, a friend, a potential lover, who obviously outlived him, but also did not end up very good in the end, because he was not very good at letting things go, and he really should have just let things go, because he was in a very good position.
All right, on to the part that has a lot more stuff to it.
Oh.
You don't have to be as crazy in detail if you don't want to be.
Hey, but Gilles de... It's not that, like, I mean, okay, we've talked about this before. French history is not in particular my specialty.
Yeah.
Especially medieval French history, right? Like, this is solidly medieval, like 1500s. So it's not really something that I've ever particularly studied into, because this is very modern for me, very religious themed. There's a lot of, like, church politics and stuff. And the thing is, I'm interested in that. I've just not studied into it a whole lot. So getting into Gilles de Rais was like opening a can of worms, where you're like, oh, you know how stores like undersell things. You get like a bag that's like this much chip and that much air, and so you open it expecting that, and then it turns out that the chip is all of the bag, and you're like, oh god, now I have 3 times more than I wanted, and it's great, but also this is too much. Do you know what I mean? And also, he's just kind of like a conflictingly shit person who like fought on the side of arguably not shit people, because he's a comrade at arms to Joan of Arc, right? Like, this man fought beside Joan of Arc. He argued for the crown to trust her and support her while he was serving on the ducal council.
The fucker just spiraled.
Yeah. So so he served on the ducal council for Charles VII, right? And Charles VII is the one who Joan of Arc was like, let me serve as your knight on behalf of you and God, and let me fight for you at the siege of Orleans. And he's one of the people who helped persuade them to send help at Orleans. He was part of the help at Orleans. He rode out with the troops with Joan at Orleans. So it's like, oh my god, but also child murderer. But also child murder. Heinous child murder.
But also the church is kind of shitty in the situation too.
Exactly. So it's an interesting.
It's not a feel good story.
No. There are many things wrong. So Gilles de Rais is descended from a collection of great feudal houses that had married together along the way, and lines died out and other lines kind of took precedence. And so he is linked to the Laval family, the House of Craon. He's a member, of the Barons of Retz, so and the House of Montmorency. So he is very much high order nobility in Brittany, right? And remember, Brittany is the kind of native northern region of France. So, even though the houses he's from were kind of like not the strongest at the time, his lineage is sort of one of the most noble that you could find because of the marrying between all these other really famous lines. He was born in Champtocha. I have no clue how to say that. Champtocha Castle, sometime in the decade between 1396 and 1406. Although sources that give his age as like potentially somewhere in the age range of 14 to 15 in 1922 would mean that he's kind of born at the later end of that range between 1403 and 1406. Most likely not as early as 1396. So, take that as you will. He has a younger brother born around 1414. And then he was given the kind of control of La Suze. La Suze is a region by his elder brother as part of his inheritance around 1434 at the ducal court in Nantes. Let's see. and that was the kind of his younger brother. So his younger brother became known as like Ren de la Suze, the youngest line of the family, and then he's got his own inheritance. So obviously, if you're giving away whole tracts of land as part of inheritance, you're well off. Like this is a rich noble family. After their mother and their father died, Giles and Ren were raised by their grandfather, Jean de Craon, the Lord of La Suze and Champtoche. And in 1415, at the Battle of Agincourt, Jean de Craon lost his son, which meant that he, lost his only male successor at the time. And so he took charge to manage the property of Giles and Ren at the time, because Giles and Ren had become the heirs to his land as well. So because of this bequeathment to them, it technically broke the testament of an earlier death, right? Guy de Lavalrais, who had appointed Jean II Tournemine de la... God, no. As tutor of the two orphans, right? So they're taken in by this kind of uncle, and because his son dies, he names them heir, but when he names them heir, he also takes control of the properties that belong to them, which is not what was set out in the will and testament of the person who originally assigned someone to watch over the two of them after their parents died. So, but who cares? It doesn't really matter. Gilles de Rais was betrothed to multiple different people as a child, and several of them did not work out. One because the girl wasn't old enough, another one just because she might have died before the marriage was set to take place. So he was eventually engaged to his third cousin, which even for nobility, third cousin's a little too close, right? I think it's something like 6th degree is where it's like allowed technically by the Catholic Church or something. I might be wrong about that, but I remember something about being like 6th degree is the clear point for incest or something. Not like genetically, but like socially or something. But so this is his third cousin. And he knew, right, because of the consanguinity, that he would need to get like special dispensation from the Pope and all that sort of stuff. And he was like, nope. So he abducted her and married her in a chapel outside of his parish church, without even posting the banns of marriage. Because of that, the church annulled their marriage and declared it incestuous. But like he was determined, he wanted to keep Catherine. So eventually, they approached the Bishop of Angers, asking them to pronounce a sentence of separation against the two of them, impose a penance, absolve them of the crime of incest, and then post the allowances and bans that would allow them to marry in due form. And eventually they did manage to marry, like properly, legally, with the consultment of the Pope and all that sort of stuff. Really, if he'd been a little bit more, like, less impatient, this might have happened without the whole incestuous marriage accusations, but he wasn't, so that should have been the first sign of trouble. Should have been the kidnapping and incestuous marriage.
Yeah.
They had one child, Murray, in 1433 or 1434, and that's the one we're referring to when I said that Prelati went to the daughter of him that was married to someone else. It's Murray. That's his only daughter. So his titles, his wealth, and his estate, those are largely kind of irrelevant to sort of his history. All that you really need to know, to be honest, is that this man is very high class, like inaccessible to commoners, like even to the vast majority of like other lords in Breton in the 15th century. His fortune is like surpassing them. His status is very high. He has an opulent lifestyle. However, perhaps too opulent. He lives above his means. So like, he's theoretically very noble, but it's one of those cases where he's spending more than he's bringing in. So he had a fairly successful military career. Following the Breton War of Succession in the 1340s to 60s, The, you know, there was a series of conflicts led by the Duchy of Brittany and sort of the dukes and House of Montfort, House of Penthievre, and all that sort of stuff. Breton royalty in the 1420s would rally behind Duchess Joan, the wife of John V, and the House of Montfort. This included supporters of the House of Penthievre, which was Jean de Craon. So Gilles de Rais would join Jean de Craon in this sort of attack against the enemies of the Duchy of Brittany. After the release of John V, because he had been imprisoned, Craon and Rais were rewarded for good and notable services, given land grants that were then converted into monetary gifts, this making up his first military feat of arms. So he likely took place in the last major conflict of the Breton War of Succession. However, there's no documented evidence of any personal engagement for him. So, like, this could be titular, or he could have actually, participated, and we just don't know for certain. At this time, the Kingdom of France was besieged by the Armagnac-Burgundian Civil War and the foreign warfare against the Lancastrian monarchy, because remember, the War of the Roses is also going on right now, which the French are involved with, through complicated political situations involving the women of the House of Anjou. So King Henry V of England established himself as the son-in-law and heir to Charles VI of France because of the Treaty of Troyes in May of 1420. But remember, Joan of Arc fought for Charles VII of France, who was trying to reestablish control of France after the English had held it for so long, and Gilles fights on the side of Joan of Arc. So, obviously. So the reason why he comes in to kind of fight on this side of the war is because there was a Franco-Breton alliance through marriages conducted through the House of Valois-Anjou. So the House of Valois-Anjou is very important. Charles VII of France was very weak, so he turned to his mother-in-law, Yolande of Aragon. Yolande of Aragon was the head of Valois-Anjou, which was the younger branch of the ruling dynasty of France. So she manages to iron out a treaty where Bretons and the Duchy of Brittany would fight on the side of France to free them from sort of English rule and control. So starting in around 1427, his name began to pop up, along with other captains in guerrilla warfare in the in the borders of Maine, where they would just harass English troops, stealing supplies, picking off soldiers at will, and so they would spare English garrisons when they took control of strongholds, right, because of the promise they made, but anyone who spoke French would be hanged because they were traitors. So these were disowned French and false French. He would contribute a significant amount of gold écus to the payment of the ransom for his cousin during the siege of Laval, right? And in 1428, new English troops landed and laid siege to Orleans. And this is where he becomes a companion with Joan of Arc. So in 1429, Joan of Arc arrives to speak with the king. And Rais was on the royal council from 1429 to 1434, only occasionally leaving for military obligations. He had the title of King's Counselor. We don't know if that's honorary or not, but he's also been called Charles VII's Chamberlain. So he was very close to Charles VII. So Rais contributed to the lifting of the siege of Orleans. He took place in the storming of the Saint-Loup Bastille on the 6th of May. He also took part with Joan of Arc in the Loire campaign in 1429, recapturing towns in the region, participating in most of the major battles during this year. During the coronation of the French monarch, he and 3 others were the ones who were in charge of carrying the Holy Ampulla from the Basilica of Saint Remy in Reims to the Metropolitan Church, and was elevated to the rank of Marshal of France because of his war record. In 1429, Charles VII entrusted the wings of his army to his marshals, Jean de Bossac and Gilles de Rais, in the case of the Anglo-Burgundian troops facing one another at Montepilloy. In September of 1429, during the siege of Paris, Joan asked for Rais and Raoul de Gaucourt to be by her side, and Rais actually did stand by her side all that day with numerous men of arms, trying in vain to cross the Parisian wall from a rear ditch, including when she was wounded by a crossbow bolt to the leg. After these activities, Charles VII honored him again for commendable services, reconfirmed his title as Marshal, granted him additional privileges. He was allowed to have a coat of arms with a border that had the fleur de lis on it, right, like the flower, which was a royal favorite only shared with like one other family at the time. So, I mean, obviously, this man is, like, up there in the government. I mean, he is actively participating in this war for the freedom of France. He is fighting on the side of Joan of Arc. We're going to generally kind of skip past the rest of his time in the war because it's just more of him fighting on the side of Charles VII, Joan of Arc, and everyone else.
We get the gist of it at this point.
Yeah. Unnecessary. So in 1432, his grandfather died, and several plots were hatched against Georges de la Tremoille, who at the time was in power in France. The Estates General held a conference at Tours in September, where Charles VII ratified the fall of the former Grand Chamberlain, Georges de la Tremoille. The House of Valois-Anjou at this time regained influence at court, and the accomplices of the kidnapping, including the enemy of Gilles de Rais, acquired great authority, which meant that Gilles de Rais was kind of on the outs already, right? So by 1432, he was no longer as popular as he had once been at court. And he had to leave because his father had died, so he had to go put everything in order. By mid-1434, because he was still in forced absence from court, he was still being urged to continue war against the Burgundians, but he didn't really have the money to do it. And so Charles VII summoned him to the city and told them that he would strip him of his office of marshal to be replaced by someone else if he couldn't succeed. And a year later, he'd actually proclaim him under interdict following complaints from his family. So Giles is out, right? He is out of court, out of favor, largely out of politics. Also, he's squandered his heritage. He spends more than he earns. Inane expenses, generally just spending too much on his military campaigns, his lavish lifestyle, and just not really building a fortune. He's losing a fortune. Between 1434 and 1435, when he was disgraced, he also began to pursue his own criminal interests more highly. He involved himself in the occult. In 1438, at his trial, according to the testimony of Prelati and Blanchette, he sought out those who knew demon summoning and alchemy and reviewed magical books to initiate experiments in the lower hall of one of his castles at T.H.E. Because he wanted to summon a demon. He wanted to contract with the demon for riches, according to Prelati. Unfortunately, after three tries and a lack of demon manifestation, he was very angry. And Prelati apparently told Giles that Baron, the demon, would only show up if he was offered parts of children as part of the sacrifice. And Rais would provide those remnants in a glass jar at a later date. And unfortunately, the experiment still didn't work, and he was left bitter, unhappy, and with much less money than he had before. And he didn't have much to begin with. During his trial, he did confess to have committed his first assault on children around 1432 to 1433. And then the famous event that led to his trial is the act of force in Saint-Étienne de Mermort. So he trusted the Castellani of Saint-Étienne de Mermort was trusted to Rennes de la Suze, his younger brother, in 1434. But Gilles de Rais changed his mind and reclaimed it in an act of force. He took the property, but unfortunately it alienated Saint Etienne de Mermort, and following a transaction with La Farande, the treasurer and the servant of John V, Duke of Brittany, who he had fought on behalf of freeing earlier as like his first act of military involvement, if the stories are to be believed. This administration of the Castellani was trusted to Jean La Farande, the brother of Geoffrey La Farande, and not Gilles de Rais. So Gilles de Rais tried to reclaim the castle again to sell it to his cousin, but Jean La Farande resisted. So on the Pentecost, Rais ambushed a troop of like 60 men near Saint Etienne de Mermort and entered the church armed, interrupting the religious mass, threatening to kill him if he did not leave the sanctuary. After opening the gates of Saint Etienne to his assailants, Jean La Farande was imprisoned there. Rais also had the other ducal agents like Jean Rousseau, who was the sergeant general, roughed up or arrested at this time. So this is the act of force. This undermined the divine and ducal majesties at the time, so he committed sacrilege by violating the Pentecost and ecclesiastical immunities, laid hands on ducal servants, which disrespects them, and this kind of all goes against the diocese of the Bishop of Nantes, who was very influential at this time in Brittany. And so he was in trouble. He was in a lot of trouble. He basically said fuck you to the entirety of the church and the nobility of Brittany at this time, and he didn't really have the money or the forces to back up his fuck you. So he was put under both ecclesiastical and secular investigations, where there was an inquisition that aimed at gathering testimony about his person. There's a bug flying in here. The results of the investigation were published in 1440, with the letters patented by Malestroit. Rais was accused of raping and murdering numerous children, demonic invocations and pacts, by the church, and then the secular justice system heard the same witnesses, concluding much of the same things, right? Which is not great. So he was summoned to appear before the court of Nantes on the charges of murdering children, sodomy, evoking demons, offending the divine majesty, and heresy, and arrested 2 days later, along with some of his accomplices, and put to official trial, right? Because the way that trials worked back then was you had an inquisition and then you had an official trial. And he did have a trial from both secular and ecclesiastical courts. According to witness testimony, the judges thought that there were adequate grounds to establish the guilt of the accused on all charges, and originally they had thought that they might have to torture him into confessing, but that really wasn't necessary, and he was sentenced to death. The sentence essentially accused him of a murder of 140 or more children and others, and he was set to be executed by hanging and burning in October, on Wednesday the 26th of October, as a matter of fact. It's said that he addressed the crowd with piety and contriteness, and said that he also asked to be the first to die of those who were scheduled to die that day. And so at 11 o'clock in the morning, he was set afire and hanged. His body was cut after he was hanged and then fell into the flames, and then reduced to ashes. So, kind of a shit person.
It's interesting because you could see how this is very much a mental health case of the time.
Yeah, in 1756, Voltaire expressed some doubts about the guilt of Gilles de Rais, but he didn't take like a serious stance on it. And so between sort of the 1750s and sort of the 1920s, there were multiple philosophers and sort of psychoanalyses of him that have tried to defend like innocence of him, saying that, you know, being accused of witchcraft and occult isn't really, by being accused of witchcraft by the church isn't really fair. You know what I mean? And so there are some interesting arguments for sort of, I mean, not necessarily his innocence, but
that
the sentencing.
The church was a little more focused on the occult when they should have been focused on the child murder.
Yeah, so even in the 1900s, Margaret Murray, who is an anthropologist, actually kind of wrote some stuff questioning the combination of ecclesiastic and secular authorities, saying that Rais was in every respect the male equivalent of Joan of Arc, whose main crime was the pursuit of knowledge. So they're kind of coming from the angle that, like, learning like occult from books isn't a crime per se. To which I look at and I'm like, I get what you mean there. I totally understand. Learning, like reading banned books, is not a crime necessarily, especially like books on witchcraft that the church banned. The children, though, that's a concern.
I feel like where I stand here is that it's good that he faced death for murdering children, but when you actually look at the motivations of the people behind him, they didn't really care till it started getting political.
Well, and then also you have to consider that the child murder, right, is said to have been spurred by the demon stuff, like in part. So like it's one of those things. Kind of, remember we talked about Elizabeth Bathory and how like there are conflicting opinions now that say that perhaps she did not actually murder a ton of little girls. That was like propaganda against her from men who resented her power and money.
But we can be pretty confident that Giles did murder children.
Yeah.
Like, this is not what's in question. What's in question here is what, like, how actually, how righteous the church and the state were being at the time.
Yeah. Now, interestingly enough, in 1992, there was a mock trial of him at the Luxembourg Palace that re-examined source material and evidence of the medieval trial. And during this, actually, the judge at the time found him to be not guilty during this mock trial. So there's some very interesting kind of modern like things to do with him. Although a lot of like sort of like 1900s and 2000s people who have been involved with this have said like later that they're not necessarily trying to prove his innocence, merely trying to re-examine the evidence and create like
be more critical of the actions of the church and state. Exactly.
There's a whole lot of there was a lot of psychopathological things written about him.
As you would expect.
Yeah, no, there was literally, in 1910, there was a medical thesis published on him called La Psychose de Gilles de Rais.
Like, I don't need to be a psychologist to look at this and say this man was very clearly not mentally well and probably would have benefited from an even slightly modern understanding of mental health.
Yeah. He's been named in a lot of, like, psychosexual analyses and such. As well as those analyzing kind of the start of like modern serial killers. So he pops up a lot all over the place, ironically, in like psychology and criminal analysis in like a way you wouldn't necessarily expect. Some people also believe that he is the influence for Charles Perrault's Bluebeard story. And I know the story of Bluebeard. I actually really enjoyed the story of Bluebeard. I think it's a beautiful bit of like pure...
Do you want to give us a quick rundown, because this will come up a couple of times?
I figured. I saw the little Bluebeard thing. So basically the story of Bluebeard goes is that this man comes by and he sees this young girl, right, and he's captivated by her beauty and insists he wants to marry her, and she's all for this, right, because he's a rich man, he's handsome, and she'll get out of poverty, right, because she's a commoner. So she marries him, and they go back to his house, and he has one rule for her: never go in this one room, right? Never. That's the only rule he has for her. So, you know, she lives her life week to week, day to day, and she's curious, right? This is a case of Pandora's box. She's so curious about this room that she cannot go in. So she decides to go in the room. And in the room are the corpse remnants of all his previous wives. And he finds her in the room, and she joins the rest of his corpse wives, or in some versions escapes and burns down the manor and kills him. But essentially, now that she's seen what he does,
She has to die.
Yeah, he has to kill her. And whether or not she escapes that is entirely dependent on how positive the outcome of that story is being told. There's a traumatizing children's cartoon of this available on YouTube for free that I watched when I was like 11. Oof.
Right, so you have seen Gilles de Rais before.
Yes, I have.
So we'll get right into it. No mystery on the class, it's Castor.
Yeah.
Because you are familiar with him from Fate Zero.
Yeah, the bug-eyed bitch.
Yep. Gilles de Rais takes most from the period of life where he gained his reputation that would eventually conflate him with Bluebeard. Mm-hmm. In Fate, it is explained that due to both his financial destitution and Jean's death, Gilles de Rais went mad and became the monster who murdered children. Mm-hmm. The nobility really didn't care though, which actually drove him further into madness. What the nobility truly cared about was that he might resort to selling his land off to an enemy nation.
Yeah, but especially because you have to think that a lot of his land was in sort of like the Brittany, and Brittany is in many ways the area that kind of borders between England and France, and with the conflict between England and France historically, and then you don't want to risk anyone from Breton or Brittany turning tail to the English, because that's how the English will establish a foothold.
So when the nobles pursued charges against him solely to seize the land, mm-hmm. They would even end up treating the very citizens as mere livestock, something that Gilles de Rais would find grossly hypocritical, mm-hmm. Since he was being convicted of the child murder. The entire ordeal caused him to lose his faith in God, a faith which would be disastrously restored when later summoned into Fate Zero. He'd meet fellow child murderer Ryunosuke, whose philosophy was that God creates horrible people like him and Gilles for entertainment. This would give Gilles a new holy purpose of causing as much carnage as possible to entertain God himself. Ultimately, he and his master would be put down by a combined force of the other acting masters in the Grail War. As a final note, he has great fascination and knowledge of servants of the foreigner class, leading to many in Chaldea putting it as almost a policy that it's best to keep him separate from them as much as possible.
Fair. Just going through some of the extra bits that won't show up in the FGO page. From the Zero Cafe. Alright, not too many relationships. Oh, my master, you are godlike. No, you must very much be God himself. You have done well to bring her here before me. Okay, so that's Jean d'Arc. He's very excited. Alas, we meet again, Jean incarnate. Let us celebrate by consuming the evils of the sea. Compared with Jean herself like this, this volume was overwhelmingly different. I am sorry for this. This was a cruel misunderstanding that exceeds the Lord's indifference. I apologize from the bottom of my heart. Oh? Why are you readying your holy sword? From overhead to a low position? I think we should call them Jean faces now.
That's what Gilles calls them.
What a thing. That is the smell of the abyss. That's to Abigail. And then, no, this will not do. Not just any blonde night maiden will do. You need to be far more clean, pretty, honest, and pure. More, how should I put it? Like Jean.
Nero, not a Saber or Jean face? What do you know?
He is very much a Jean simp. Just clicking through. No. No.
So, Gilles is a powerful alchemist capable of many great feats of magecraft. Amongst them is the creation of magical items, despite him actually lacking the item creation skill. But perhaps more terrifying actually comes from his noble phantasm, which allows him to summon demons to act as his familiars to do combat for him. Mm-hmm. I'll get into that in a second when we cover the noble phantasm itself.
Appreciation of the arts, appreciation of blasphemy, mental pollution, evil eye of the abyss. Okay. And then, so noble phantasm, Prelati's spellbook.
Yes. This is the spellbook provided by his mentor Prelati. Gilles can use this to call forth powerful demons. Most of them are small and easier to kill, acting more as combat familiars than anything approaching a noble phantasm's power. However, the raw However, the raw amount he can sustain can allow him to overwhelm his opponents pretty easily. But more to the point, he is capable of summoning a massive one called the Gigantic Horror, an extra-dimensional evil god, and yes, it's a Fate Outer god. We don't know which one or whether it's worth noting on its own, but it's part of why Giles has a fascination with foreigners.
So it's Cthulhu-esque.
Yes. You could probably find a picture if you click into it. The Gigantic Horror. Scroll down. Because you're not going to get a good image of it in FGO. Because this was in Fate Zero.
Okay. There we go.
So we actually have a lot of FGO NPs to go through, but yeah, I can check that.
It's Takeshi Takeuchi. No.
Yeah, he's the Fate artist.
Yeah, I'm not. No. Okay.
He's also Year 1 servant, so caster balls.
I could tell.
Literally launch.
Yeah, caster balls.
So uncreative.
Yeah, right. I'm just gonna.
And I hate to say it, the NP is not gonna redeem
this. But we gotta watch it. Yeah, that was not much.
But we also have an arcade.
Arcades are usually a little bit better.
Usually a lot better, to be honest. Even some of the worst servants usually from original Geo tend to look pretty good in arcade.
That is fair. That's right, she's not your beloved John. Kill her. Kill her for using John's face. Yeah, that's much better. Oh, no, not Lord Elmaloy. And Siegfried?
Yep. See, yeah, arcade much better.
Yeah. Alright.
And this one we actually might need to cut out, so...
Okay. Well, if you guys don't see this in the video, we are going to watch the Extella link. Okay.
So yeah, we do have another version of Giles, though. Actually, a couple more. So next we have Giles de Rais Saber.
Okay.
This Giles is technically also from an anime.
He looks like the Knights of the Round Table.
A little bit, but yeah, actually I think it's based off the same artwork of him that's on the Wikipedia page for Giles de Rais.
Yeah, no, I saw that. But yeah, just because like the way it looks is very...
He is also a launch servant.
I was gonna say, I can tell. He looks very old.
So, meet Giles de Rais Saber, a surprise extra servant that was summoned during the events of Fate Apocrypha, thanks to Shakespeare chain summoning him off Jean. He is summoned to be more like how he was during the 100 Years' War, as he fought alongside Jean.
Okay.
This is meant to drive her to madness. However, even as she sees him slowly becoming more like his caster self, she retains her identity, and this moves Giles, helping him to keep his cool and ultimately aid Jean d'Arc, despite his limited summoning. In FGO, he can be summoned again, and is significantly more sane than caster. However, he is prone to obsession with John, and will occasionally slip into tendencies not unlike his caster self that he needs to pull himself back from.
Okay. Got a couple of relationships here. I wonder what about those clothes, but looking well, not bad. That was about his caster self. The girl I used to line up with. I don't regret having pledged everything for the girl, even my life, even my status. A once saint that has fallen into blackness. Even so, if she said, "Follow me," I would gladly serve as her entourage to the ends of hell. Valid.
So, he is not the physically strongest servant, as even in life he was most acclaimed for his financial contributions compared to his physical ones. As a result, he has a golden rule skill, and in his own right he is a decent tactician, making up somewhat for his limited abilities. His abilities can be upped by sacrificing his sanity, as he becomes more and more driven to madness by memories of Jean's death. This is enough that, given enough push, he can straight up become his caster self.
Yeah, if he uses Prelati spellbook.
Yep.
I see he's got Saint War Order as his noble phantasm. But that if he gets Jean's flag, he can use Luminosité Éternelle?
Yes. Yeah. So, Saint or Order, Giles gains increased parameters as he relives fighting under the banner of a saint. They are comparable to the boost from a madness enhancement.
Okay. His designer is a different person, Shinjiro, who's done Sashibo Benkei, Penthesilea, and Bluebeard. Okay.
So we actually have both an FGO and an arcade today.
Oh.
Also, year 1 FGO.
Yeah.
Better than Caster Balls.
Yeah, it's slasher balls. Slasher balls. Yeah, I'm not. Nope. Nope.
No. Yeah. More interesting.
Oh. Okay.
He didn't get an animation update, but Jean got an animation update that's special with him.
Okay. Oh.
She gets to poke the Giles' eyes. Technically, this is also on Caster, but this is the easiest video to find.
Yeah.
I just thought you'd be amused seeing it.
Oh, yeah. Glorious. Just.
And that's unique only when fighting Giles.
I love that.
The true noble phantasm of Gilles de Rais.
Gilles de Rais. 参上いたしましてございます。
Is it rude of me to say that he looks pale and inbred?
I mean, he's a noble. A European noble.
I don't know that they were less inbred than that in that period than you might think sometimes.
I'm just saying, European nobility, white and inbred. That's not
That is
uncommon.
True. That is true.
Better than just flagging.
Yeah.
So yeah, as you can see, the two Gileses are a little bit hampered by early FGO.
Mm-hmm.
We did get another form of him. This is not a full FGO like summonable form, but remember how we had Prince of Law and Ling, and then we had the other version of him that was just Prince of Law and Ling again, but in a different class.
Mm-hmm.
We have that for Giles here.
Okay.
And this is, they made Saber Giles a caster and called him Bluebeard.
Oh.
This is actually a theoretical alter ego based on the literary Bluebeard.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't much to him. He was simply the wife killer, not driven, and he's not driven bad by John or political or religious hypocrisy. It is just the wife killer from story.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Interesting.
His noble phantasm's a little bit different. It's unknown exactly what the lore behind it is, but it seems to act like Prelati's spellbook, summoning demons, except this time it's the sword itself. Or he uses the sword itself. He summons a demon called a Chthonian. It's not the same demon that Giles normally summons. I don't know all the details on them. But what his noble phantasm actually does, it might be the sword itself, but it also could, the way it reads, it also could be a reality marble. I'm not 100% sure.
Chthonians are just, okay, they're just demons.
Yeah. I don't know if there's any lore details that just aren't Wikipedia yet.
Okay. If it's open, I have no choice but to do this. Oh, my wife. The skill names are funny. Noble Phantasm name. Forbidden Red Room, the taboo opened by magical key. Yeah. The locked room you cannot go in. Oh, so you're fighting...
我が秘密の部屋より見てはならぬ奇跡が今溢れ出す。
Okay, so not...
Nothing special.
Alright.
This part's going to be a little fun. This character is not an FGO, but there's a lot to go over here. So, next, let me introduce you to Francesca Prelati.
Okay. Aw, she's so cute.
The name might make you think that this is, that the fucker might have reproduced.
Yeah.
But no. No, he didn't. Francesca here that you see is the same as Francois Prelati that befriended Giles.
Okay.
She's actually a reincarnator. continually putting her consciousness and memories into new bodies. It is totally unknown who the first Prelati was, but at the moment, but her magecraft has lineages going all the way back to Merlin, having learned from spirits directly taught by him. She's going to be a very notable character, as she is one of the main antagonists of Fate's Strange Fake and is the architect behind the 2 Grail Wars of that series. As a result of her nature, she is continually come into conflict with major figures within Type Moon. I won't go through all of them, but amongst some of the more notable ones are the first magician, Kishir Zelresh, who I won't be giving an overview of today, but let's just say that in all the Type Moon stories, all of them are being watched by him. Think of him as the Watcher from Marvel Comics, in a way, just studying and making sure the universes don't all implode on themselves. The next 2 names should be more familiar to you. First is Toko Aozaki, who ended up in a blood feud with Prelati, who was hunted and killed by Toko 13 times across the years for disrespecting her. Eventually, Toko's family, read probably Aoko, intervened and secured a ceasefire on the condition that they never cross paths again.
I love that for Toko. We love a good vengeful 13 killings.
Yeah.
Like, this bitch really was like, you and all of your reincarnations
are going to die
by me.
The second and more nefarious is that Prelati had been studying Fuyuki's Grail War system for years, going back to the Second Grail War when things first got extra bloody and violent.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually she tried to directly intervene during the Fourth Grail War due to 2 things. The first being a fascination with the summoning of King Arthur, and more importantly, the summoning of her protege and friend Gilles de Rais.
Mm-hmm.
She was intercepted by Zoken Mato, who killed her and blocked her entry to Fuyuki for years, in a rare W for the old decaying Bugman.
Mm-hmm.
She tried again during the Fifth Holy Grail War during the events of Fate's Day Night, but was again intercepted by Zoken, and on top of that was was prevented from interfering due to a couple other factors. The first was the involvement of Dr. Heartless from the Case Files series and his schemes surrounding the background, or schemes going on in the background, keeping Fuyuki very monitored. And next was Kirei being way too powerful, as he could probably kill her permanently. And finally, I guess the last thing to note here is, by now she was already being hunted by Toko. She would only barely make it in to analyze the Grail before having to retreat by the time Fate's Day Night started and not truly being able to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
Due to a lot of factors resolving themselves, she was able to orchestrate the Strange Fate Grail War later in America as a culmination of her plans of the Grail War. As far as abilities go, she is a ridiculously powerful and well-connected mage that has become a monster of a similar existence to Dead Apostles' vampires, to the point of being a direct competitor to them for human resources. She is, however, able to summon a very peculiar servant herself. Click into the next page. Meet Francois Prelati, caster servant.
Oh boy.
Due to Prelati's incarnation during the time of Joan of Arc and Gilles de Rais, he has secured himself a place in the Throne of Heroes. And while his consciousness is passed from one host to the next, Prelati himself did die by the end in a burning at the stake. So he can be summoned as a caster-class servant with all the memories he had up to the death of that incarnation of himself. So, yes, Francesca summoned Francois. He is not, surprisingly, the same exact cruel, gore-loving person as Francesca, and the two get along like 2 peas in a pod, mostly because that's exactly what they are.
Lovely.
As far as abilities go, as you might expect, he'll have access to largely the same magecraft as his living self, but moreover, he's a master illusionist, able to fool even non-living objects.
Mm-hmm.
This is magecraft directly tied back to Merlin, who also specializes in illusions.
Mm-hmm.
He has 2 noble phantasms, the first being Prelati's spellbook, which he's unable to use, but has it on hand. And the second is called Grand Illusion, which is a powerful fake reality marble, able to confuse and trick even the world itself. Its contents may as well be real to the one experiencing it, and is able to befuddle even powerful vampires.
Fun.
So yeah, that's Prelati.
Hilarious. Alright. All right. We've got a Grail League. That's adorable. And he's just cheering on Jean. All right. I knew he had a dual figure because I'd seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, okay. Interesting. Okay. I don't have that many craft essences. Alright. Holy Maiden leading Chaldea. And of course, he's at her feet. They say the flag wielded by the Maiden of Orleans is the symbol of hope and inspiration for many to follow. Well, that aside, she walks the path of flames, leading heroes to victory. Believe in the glorious my room that awaits at the end of the path. Okay. Craft essence is a reference to the painting Liberty Leading the People. La liberté guidant de la people. Love that. Alright, letter from a friend. Ooh. There's bits. And a skull.
Take a guess as who that friend is.
Ah, Giles. My beloved friend, I imagine you're now suffering hellish tortures, ones which would demolish my feeble reason. Your suffering is my suffering, your joys are my joys, and the crime you committed is my crime as well. We grow to hate those we love, as we hate we are tested. I consider carefully this discrepancy, this lamentation of the soul, and I think how I wish to save you. However, I fear there is no escape from this fall from grace, for there is no remedy that will overcome it. It is within this mind that I invite you to visit my workshop. Help me with additional studies and pursuits. Did you not ask me once before, why am I helping you? The answer I'll put down here for you, the one I love. While we share a common past, you aren't like me. While God had made you suffer and you have ended up where you are, as you cursed him, you do not reject him. I have seen the truth of faith here. While sinking in a sea of evil, I have honest respect for your not having drowned in it. I will help you till the end of your days. Welcome to the dining hall of nightmares and terror. Ugh. Holy night dinner.
Back there somewhere.
He's pouring alcohol. But this is Jean C. And we are pretty sure, yeah, we already read this. So we're going to skip it. Giles Kundal. Oh, is this what I have?
Yep. This is a real thing I stole from Fate.
A Gilles de Rais doll that was made for Christmas one year. This is an original. It even lights up and talks. It's fluffy and cute, but it's a bit creepy too. I have this. Trick or treat. This is Florence's.
Yep. He's
Oh, so he's like on the floor somewhere probably. Yeah, he's one of those 3 people that's just...
dead.
Yep, dead. Phantom Knight. Okay, we just read this and we just did this and he's right there.
There's the sea I was talking about.
Yep. New beginning. Up on the roof with a flag waving. Yeah. Jean d'Arc altar, Jean d'Arc altar Santa Lily, and Gilles de Rais. In sickness and in health. Oh. Look, they're buying. Oh, and there's Blackbeard.
Servant Fess.
I like that they're getting little things for Jean. It's adorable. They look so happy. Jesus fucking Christ. No matter the genre, his love for Oshi remains the same. Although the costumes are different, they belong to the same maiden, so even a saint would be allowed. In this way, the work of the Normalization Committee increased by 1 more. Okay. Gilles de Rais, Saber. Alright, Grail League, Batter Up. And Striker League. Adorable. Okay, anything... Okay, oh, so he also has...
A dual figure.
A dual figure. And then this is his little bit of like... Okay, so it's one of these. I don't think I know everyone here.
No,
so
you don't.
I will not flip to the English translation. So I'll just leave it on the Japanese. But it is nice art. Okay. Feet. Alright. The Merciless One. Oof. Selfless love is noble and heartfelt devotion is beautiful. Seeking ideals is undoubtedly a virtue, but the dragon witch shall always remember at the end of glory, a knight was hurt, defeated, and at the end fell to darkness. A reference to the Christian artistic representation of Pieta, depicting Mother Mary holding Jesus in her lap after the crucifixion. Interesting. Prelati's spellbook. That is creepy. I do not like that. It is said that the book he accepted is bound in human skin. It was composed of curses towards humanity in every conceivable way. By rights, the book deserves to be burned. However, as he is now, it was the truth of the world. You have crushed my saint, he screams to the heavens. Therefore, I too shall trample the miracles you have created. I shall slaughter those pure and lovable children to my heart's content. The man's pitch black eyes were utterly stagnant. Oof. Jean fan club set. Oh my god, look, it's Giles and fucking... I think that's one of the mysterious heroines.
Probably.
Oh, she's giving a lecture on the different saber faces. There's charts and diagrams. Oh, and there's the two little Jeans down there. And there's Jean Santa. And Jean artwork. A fanzine from the Jean fan club. I keep telling you that various versions of me don't just sprout up like weeds, so the White Saint comments. But aren't there still the magical girl or high school girl uniform versions of you? Gotta collect them all. Nope. The very name of that was a spoiler.
I didn't get a good look at it.
It was literally called Detective Edmond.
Ah, yeah, no, let's not look at that one.
And we literally just saw this.
So yeah, that's Gilles de Rais and Prelati.
Yeah, it's interesting. They're certainly not like one of my favorite characters. I don't really like them very much, and the historical context does not help me in any way. And it's not an area I'm familiar with, so like, even I got a little lost reading through all the like political and kind of battle stuff, which is why I didn't really go over all of it in detail. Because like I don't know most of the stuff that it's referencing, and it's hard to keep track of, but it's interesting.
Alright, I'll just say our next set of servants are like two that really have no reason to be grouped together other than I want to show Sekhie a very, very, very specific thing, and that's it.
And to be honest, they're included in this month of monsters because of me. And it's a sort of tongue-in-cheek joke. So if you look for like monsters, you're not gonna find them.
Only one of them really qualifies as such.
Yeah. Anyways, with that utterly confusing hint that probably did not help you in any way, we'll see you next time. Happy spooky season!